we can all agree that if someone is able to speak about what matters to them, the change they want to make in the world, a particular passion or area of interest, it makes them sparkle and it's contagious and it makes them stand out, right? So that's the connection you want to make, regardless of how you talk about research in future. Find that thing that lights you up. Hello Dr. Humans, welcome back to the channel. So after my video last week on hot tips for cover letters, I was recording a Q&A for the actual course itself for Rock Your Cover Letter, because I'd done a live Q&A, but this on-demand version, I wanted to make the Q&A really pop and go into things in a bit more detail for you. And one of the questions was about research in your cover letter and your interview. And this can be controversial. So if you're someone who has no interest in research and you're like, how do I approach this? What am I going to say? This video is for you. This Q&A is part of Rock Your Cover Letter, the actual course, but I wanted to share it here because I think that it's an important message to get out there. And again, this is my personal opinion. It does not represent anyone else or the establishments I work for. I hope you enjoy this video and I hope it helps you in your cover letters and your interviews. What if I don't want to do research? This is a great question. Now, what I think is important to tell you is how the hospitals view research and how you should therefore interact with research. So in different countries, this culture varies. So for example, in Canada and the UK, from what I gather from people who've worked there, they do obviously value research. Research is going to be great in every country, it's going to be acknowledged, but they also acknowledge that it's not for everyone and that some people will remain in a more clinical space whilst others will embark on research. Neither is good or bad, but there's space for everyone to develop in their own way and, you know, design their career depending on their interests. Now, of course, in saying that, I have not worked in the UK for a very long time and I've only been hearing about Canada through friends who've worked there. It's possible it's changed, but I think in Australia, the culture in public hospitals is very clear that research is viewed as pretty much an essential part of being a doctor and an essential feature of who they want to hire. Now, the reasons for this are layered. And of course, I'm largely referring to big tertiary centres as opposed to small rural centres where there might not be so much emphasis on research. But when you're a doctor in training, chances are along the way you're trying to get a job in a major tertiary centre. So why is research so highly regarded in Australian medical culture? And I think there are a few layers to this. So the first thing is that the hospitals see this as a way to boost their own reputation. So if you are someone who's good at research and getting publications, if you then do research within that establishment, then they become affiliated with your research. So you're giving the hospital a gift and prestige, right? When you do successful research inside their walls, they get credit for it. And so that's the hospital at large. But there's also the people in charge, right? The heads of departments or whoever you might be doing research with. They too benefit from you doing the research, right? Professor types who are engaged with research ultimately have lots of research ideas, but to bring those ideas to life, they need people to do the research, right? They're not going to do it themselves. So in that sense, doing research is part of your value to them, part of your human value. They place value on your head depending on whether you've got an interest in research, whether you're good at research, all the things. For example, if you're entering an advanced trainee program and people are thinking about hiring you, they're thinking about the long game. They're thinking, could this person bring one of my PhD projects to life, right? They're thinking ahead. So I say that to you because I had to figure that out along the way, that so much of hiring decisions, in advanced training at least, is related to that long game of seeing you as the person who's going to bring their research project to life. Are you going to do that PhD for them? That tends to be the way things are in Australia. That is a culture that I've certainly come across in my own experience, right? And as you go through your specialty training, you're basically told that you're expected to do a PhD in order to get a consultant job at the end, is right? You're told that no one will hire you unless you do that. etc., etc. Now, that's not all centres, and obviously I'm currently working in a public hospital. I don't have a PhD, and there are many people that I know that work in public hospitals and currently do not have a PhD and will never have a PhD, and it's all fine. But when you're going through your training, you'll get this message, you will be told this, that research is the path to your dreams. And if your dream is working in a public hospital, that is something that will be said to you. So it's not necessarily true when you finish, but it's what you'll be told, and research is definitely part of your human value to the employer during your training. Okay, so that's one aspect, is bringing their research to life. But another way to look at this is, who's making these hiring decisions? Because people who are making the hiring decisions in a public hospital, they often have done research and maybe a PhD. And so when they're hiring, they're going to resonate the most with someone who is like them, right? Everyone's hiring a mini-me version of themselves. That's just how it is, right? I'm going to be drawn to a high vibe, clinically focused, maybe someone who's got an interest in education, human who shows up authentically. But I'm usually not the person making the hiring decisions, right? Professor types who are engaged in research are going to be searching for the mini-me versions of themselves, which includes people who have an interest in research, right? That's how the system works. That is just human nature. So if you are truly interested in research, then that is wonderful. You are set up to win this game. If, however, you are not interested in research, then I have a couple of things to say to you about this. I would actually recommend that you do a couple of things. The first thing to do is tune into what contribution you would make if it's not research. So some people don't love research, but they love making change in the hospital system for the better, and they're geared towards hospital management and leadership, and so engagement in audits and other innovations within the clinical space can be impressive. So an example of this, that's something I participated in when I was a resident, was that as I was working as a junior doctor, every time I wanted to prescribe an antibiotic, I had to look up the therapeutic guidelines. But that was taking a lot of time, and it was annoying, and it was just really inefficient. So one day I sat down and I made a one-page summary of the empirical guidelines, and then I took this one-page summary to one of the ID consultants and said, do you think we should spread this around the hospital and put it on the intranet? And so then that was implemented, and it's now given to interns on their rotations. It's now in the emergency department, all of those things. And so this was a demonstration of innovation and leadership that ultimately improved the efficiency within the clinical environment. So that sounds great, and that sounds like you have something like a real interest in making change for the better. So that's an example of something that you could talk about if you have something like that you want to share. Another thing that you might be interested in is medical education, which is of course the path that I chose, and that is also very relevant to your contribution within the hospital. And you can highlight your interest in this as well as your future goals in that area. So if you're not interested in research, you can for sure place emphasis on those other aspects like hospital management, innovation, leadership, or medical education that are still useful to the hospital system at large. But if I'm being honest with you, I think you should do both. Even if you don't think that you're going to embark on research in future, I would tend to advise that you should find something you can say about research that you might want to do in future. Or pick out some kind of research that you might be interested in. Maybe find an example of someone who's done a PhD around town that you found inspiring, and talk about why you found them inspiring and why you might want to do a PhD a bit like theirs. So for example, as I went through my interviews for advanced training, I really wasn't feeling the PhD coming out of me, and I was a bit lost because at that time I was told that that's what I had to do. So I genuinely had to say something about it because I felt like it was on the cards, right? I felt like I didn't have a choice but to do a PhD. So even though I didn't really feel like I was connected to the PhD, I thought I would have to do one. And so I would say something like, I'm definitely considering doing a PhD in future, but I also understand that that's a massive undertaking, and so I would really need to be resonating with the research question being asked before I embarked on that project. And then I would make reference to someone that inspired me, and at that time it was Dr. John Whitlam at the Austin Hospital. His PhD was pretty inspiring to me, and it was a clinical PhD that didn't involve mice. So I chatted for a while about how something like that project would appeal to me, right? So that was a way to talk about research in an honest way and an authentic way while still being able to talk about research. So I think there is a way to talk about this, or research areas of interest, in our interviews and cover letters that are authentic. And I think it's important to remember that you don't have to be married to it, right? If you say something like that now, if it's a research interest now, that can change. So everything's fine. We are allowed to change our minds. And when it comes to research and discussing research in our job applications, I think it serves us well to think about the impact we want to have on the world. What would be the much bigger picture of doing that? And that's true for all research and audit projects, big and small, right? All research and audit projects have the potential to make change in what we do in the clinical environment or on a national or global level. So if you want to do research in a particular area or in a particular clinical condition, you want to think about why. Why does that light you up? What does that mean to you? And how would you like to affect change in the world by doing that research? Because ultimately that's going to be where your authenticity and your spark come out. And that is what's going to make you shine brighter than other candidates who just say they have an interest in research. And I must tell you, I have sat in many an interview with young people who have masters in public health. It feels like everybody got the memo that they had to do a masters in public health to get a job. And if I'm honest, it does help you get a job. It for sure helps you get a job. It's definitely true. And even just working towards a master's definitely helps you get a job. But when I asked these young people questions about research and future related to public health, they appeared dead inside. It was very uninspiring. It did appear inauthentic, and it made me sort of less keen on them as a candidate, just that sort of blank that they drew when talking about public health. And so on paper, it was good, but in an interview, to me, it was off-putting in some way because they just couldn't connect their choices of why they did the masters to the future, right? It just didn't inspire me at all. And that might just be because of what I said before. Like I'm going to resonate with authenticity and people who are sort of owning their truth, right? Because I found that quite hard to do along the way. But I think that we can all agree that if someone is able to speak about what matters to them, the change they want to make in the world, a particular passion or area of interest, it makes them sparkle and it's contagious and it makes them stand out, right? So that's the connection you want to make, regardless of how you talk about research in future. Find that thing that lights you up. Find that thing that you can talk about and sparkle. You know, how do you want to change the world? So whether you do or do not have a research interest, I want you all to be able to talk about an area of interest in research, but also the why behind it. Why would you want to do it? How are you going to change the world? What impact are you going to have? How are you going to contribute to the field of medicine in your career? I want you to connect to that and I want you to practice speaking about it out loud. You don't have to be married to it. You can change your mind. But just to recap, if you do want to play to win, my advice is, and this is just my personal opinion, have a research interest that you can talk about authentically, even if you have no actual plans to do that research in future. So that was my take on how to discuss research in your interviews, especially if you're someone who doesn't really like research. But even if you are, making sure that you connect your research interest to how that's going to impact the world. How are you going to change the world in your career? What lights you up? That is going to be the thing that makes you stand out for country miles. And if you are writing a cover letter and are looking for a bit more help with this, a bit more guidance, then definitely check out Rock Your Cover Letter. We go through how to write a cover letter paragraph by paragraph. I'm not kidding. And I even share the cover letter that got me into advanced training back in the day. So very high yield indeed. And there are even more Q&As in there to help you with all of those curly cover letter questions. So if that's something you need in your life, click the link below and I'll see you on the inside. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye.